When people think of witch trials, they usually imagine Salem, a small town, a handful of judges, a brief moment of panic. But decades before Salem and on a far larger scale, something very different unfolded in the Basque country along the border of modern-day Spain and France. Thousands were accused, children became witnesses, entire villages were consumed by fear. And yet, unlike much of Europe, this story does not end with mass executions. Instead, it ends with skepticism. The Basque Witch Trials would become one of the largest witch hunts in European history, not because of how many died, but because of how many were investigated and how few were ultimately condemned. You've turned into Haunted Wavelength. My name is Darks, and tonight I will be your guide. Here we don't just tell stories, we step inside them. Before we begin, draw the curtains, dim the lights, settle in, and let me take you there. The Basque region has always stood apart. Its language, Euskara, is unrelated to any other in Europe. Its folklore predates Christianity. Its mountains, caves, and forests were filled with stories of spirits, nocturnal gatherings, and ancient beings long before inquisitors arrived. This cultural separation mattered. To outsiders, especially religious authorities, Basque customs often appeared strange, secretive, and dangerously unorthodox. After the Spanish crown completed the conquest of Navarre in the early 16th century, the region fell more directly under the authority of the Spanish Inquisition. And with that authority came suspicion. The first witch trials in the Basque country began in 1525, shortly after the region's political subjugation. These early cases set a precedent. Children were brought in to identify witches by searching for the devil's mark. People were arrested and executed in several locations. Unfortunately, the exact numbers are unknown. But crucially, the Inquisition soon intervened and slowed the process down. Instead of endorsing mass executions, inquisitors urged skepticism. They discouraged property confiscation and emphasized re-education rather than death. This early restraint would later prove decisive. And then everything changed in 1609 across the border in French Basque territory. A Bordeaux magistrate named Pierre de Lange launched an aggressive witch hunt in the province of Laborde. He believed witchcraft was everywhere. According to Lange, witches gathered at night in secret sabbats. They worshipped the devil in goat form, and they danced, feasted, and committed sexual acts and plotted harm. Because of him, in less than a year, around 70 people were burned alive, including priests. Lange estimated that 10% of the population, roughly around 3,000 people, were witches. He was eventually removed from the office, but the damage was done. Fear crossed the border, and it was there to stay. In January 1609, witch trials began in the Spanish city of Logrono, home to an Inquisition tribunal overseeing much of northern Spain. Accusations flooded in. By 1610, thousands were accused. Entire villages were implicated, and children as young as 7 years old testified. The trials culminated in the auto da fe of November 1610. 6 people were burned alive. 5 more, already dead from imprisonment or torture, were burned in effigy. But something unusual followed. Instead of escalating, the Inquisition paused. Enter Alonso de Salazar Frías. The turning point of this entire story rests on one man. Alonso de Salazar Frías, a young inquisitor and lawyer was tasked with investigating the supposed witch cult more deeply. Armed with an edict of grace promising forgiveness to anyone who confessed, Salazar traveled village to village in 1611. What he found was staggering. Nearly 2,000 confessions were collected, over 5,000 additional people were named, and more than 1,300 of these confessors were children. But when Salazar questioned them, again without torture, the story unraveled. Most of the accused recanted. They admitted that they had been pressured, repeated what others told them, some dreamed the events, and some simply heard rumors. And Salazar found no physical evidence. So no bones, no ritual objects, and most importantly, no proof of harm. His conclusion was blunt. There were neither witches nor bewitched until they were talked about. Because of all, the central to the accusation was the witches' Sabbath. According to testimonies, witches flew on broomsticks or animals. They met in caves or meadows. The devil appeared to them as a black goat, acrobats. They mocked Catholic sacraments, and there were feasts, dances, and sometimes even cannibalism too. These stories were vivid and eerily consistent. Historians still debate why. Some argue mass hysteria and suggestion created a shared narrative. Others believe the stories drew on real folk traditions, rephased into something diabolical by fear and interrogation. Basque folklore already included night gatherings, spirit journeys, sacred caves, and ritual dances, and under pressure, familiar customs may have been transformed into crimes and something that needed to be haunted. However, one of the most disturbing aspects of the Basque Witch Trials is that children drove the accusations. They were used as witnesses to confess or to accuse. Their testimonies were detailed, emotional, and convincing, but also fragile. Once removed from pressure, many admitted they had only repeated what others expected to hear. This alone sets the Basque trials apart from most European hunts. Salazar's findings caused outrage among his colleagues. Other inquisitors accused him of being naive, undermining authority, or to be the devil's advocate. But Madrid listened, and in 1614, the Suprema, the Inquisitor's highest court, issued new rules, which meant that confessions alone were insufficient. They made sure physical evidence was presented as it was now required, and the most important, accusations without proof were to be dismissed completely. This decision effectively ended witch trials in Spain. While Protestant region continued executing thousands, Spain stopped. After 1614, witch trials became rare, executions nearly vanished, and skepticism replaced panic, a huge thing in itself in these times when others were executing accused left and right. After this, Spain and Portugal would see fewer than 100 witchcraft cases in a year, with almost no executions, while Northern Europe continued burning. The Basque witch trials did not end because evil was defeated or because truth suddenly triumphed over fear. They ended because unusually someone stopped and looked closely at what was happening and realized there was nothing there. Salazar concluded something radical for his time, that witchcraft existed primarily because people had been taught how to confess to it. Across Europe, witch hunts would continue for decades. Tens of thousands would still die, but in Basque, the fire burned itself out, and that too became part of its legacy. Still, despite the scale of the panic, history remembers only a few who were ultimately executed, and that scarcity of names does not lessen the tragedy. On November 7, 1610, 6 people were burned alive at Logrono. Maria de Arburu, elderly and isolated, whose confessions were shaped by pressure rather than proof. Maria de Zozaya and Garciana de Barranquera, ordinary women whose lives collapsed under rumor. Maria de Juritegui, condemned as a relapsed witch, an unforgivable label in the eyes of the court, and Juanes de Gobura, executed alongside his son Miguel, a reminder that accusation rarely stop with one person. We don't have his exact age, but Miguel was believed to be only 11 or 12 years old. 5 others, Dominga de Barranquera, Juanes de Akelarres, Maria de Zubieta, Catalina de Echevira, and Maria de Akegaray, were condemned after death. They are buried in effigy. Their bodies spared the flames, but not the judgment. Thousands more were accused, questioned, terrified, and changed forever. Most survive, but survival does not mean innocence was restored, or fear had been forgotten. The story of the Basque Witch Trials is not one of mass execution, but of mass belief and how fragile truth becomes when fear is allowed to speak louder than evidence. The villagers did not erupt into violence because they were cruel or ignorant. They did so because fear spreads faster than reason, because authority rewarded confession, and because once a story takes hold, it becomes safer to repeat it than to challenge it. What makes this story rare is not that people were accused, but that the process was finally questioned and not just taken at face value. In this change lies quiet memorial to those who were lost, not only the names burned into records and stone, but those nameless people too, who lived through suspicion, shame, and silence. The Basque Witch Trials remind us that fear does not need monsters to thrive, only belief, repetition, and the refusal to ask whether what we are hunting is real at all. That sometimes the greatest act of justice is simply to stop, and sometimes it is enough if only one person steps up and asks questions, standing by their beliefs, no matter what others think. This has been Haunted Wavelength. Tonight's broadcast is over, but not the shadows that haunt the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, or follow so you don't miss what awaits in the dark. Until next time, take care and listen closely. You never know what you might hear next.